Hello, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're calling in from. I do want to get started because we have quite a bit of material to get through. There's some intro slides for those that are joining as well to start off with. So hopefully a few more people will be joining as we get started here. So welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining this session focused on simultaneously preparing compliant PDFs for global submissions. We've ran a number of webinars in the past focused on different areas of preparing your submission content, more at an individual document level. What we're really focusing in this session on is how to simultaneously create multiple PDFs for different health authorities that have slightly different requirements in terms of their PDF specifications, etc. as well. So that's what we're going to focus on here today. So with that, just a couple of quick comments, a couple of welcomes to begin with. I'll mention a couple of housekeeping points at the beginning, but just want to have a quick look at some of the existing processes in preparing global renditions. So rather than individual renditions, how you create sort of multiple simultaneous renditions, how you might do that today. And really then before sort of jumping into how that can be automated, whether at an individual health authority level or obviously more importantly for this session, how you can simultaneously create PDFs for multiple health authorities at the same time and look at some of the benefits, etc. at the end. A couple of quick points. At the bottom, there is a chat window as well. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to sort of leave a comment in the chat. There are a couple of people online who should be able to answer those questions that you have. If they can't, I will answer them I'll follow up with you afterwards, any questions they're not able to answer online right now as well. So please feel free to use the chat. There will be some links, etc. in there as well, potentially as well as we go through the session. So please use that. Quick comment about the giveaway that was on the intro video as we were going through, but also here, every 25th registrant who signed up will receive a small gift on our behalf. So don't be surprised if marketing reach out just to sort of get an address where they could send that to as well. Obviously, just in time for the holidays. It's not something that's going to get you in trouble with your organization. It's typically something like a giveaway you'd expect at a trade show, for example, as well. But good luck with that. With that, just very briefly, an intro for those on the line that don't know us so well. DocShifter is a platform that allows for high volume, any-to-any content conversion and enrichment. So that means we take content from any repository, we analyze that content, potentially fixing it as we go, converting it, transforming it into different content for different purposes. In this case, focused on submission preparation. We enrich that content, and then we store the results somewhere else, either back in the same repository or somewhere else. So ultimately, that's the aim of the platform. But because of the functionality that's available, it can actually serve many different use cases as well. Here, we're going to focus on one, but we do have a number of sessions that focus on different use cases from report generation to just kind of analyzing, validating your Word content, automatically fixing it. Same thing with your PDF content, etc. as well. So we do have a number of other sessions that are referred to as we go through this session. There's a platform that can scale to organizations of any size as well. So whether you're a small biotech organization with just hundreds of people or sort of a top tier pharma, with tens of thousands of employees, ultimately can scale to any volume of content that you throw at it as well. Just obviously to begin with looking at why you might want to automate some of these processes, it's the same story. Obviously, the key thing centrally is to reduce risk, really streamlining a process that can be typically very manual, time-consuming, really accelerate that content preparation process that you go through, preparing content to go into submissions. What it allows you to do is achieve content compliance earlier, rather than not knowing if your content, the individual pieces of the submission, are actually compliant until you actually run it through a publishing tool and validate it at the end. You typically don't really know, does it really fully meet the needs of the health authorities? This really should allow you to be able to do that much earlier, the point at which you create the rendition in the first place. So we'll look at some of that as we go through, and we have other sessions that talk about that in more detail. But ultimately, the whole aim really of doing this and automating it is it can help a goal of creating simultaneous global submissions as well. The idea is if you can simultaneously create renditions for all the health authorities that are needed, ultimately can help in that aim and that target. So what we'll look at quickly first is some existing processes, so what you might be going through right now. And this is obviously simplified somewhat, but at a high level, content is authored typically in tools like Office, whether that's Word primarily or other authoring tools. That content is then reviewed, which is a manual process or potentially in batch a little bit, depending on tools you're using, updated again manually, rendered at various points in its life cycle. That content then gets rendered to PDF. That PDF, though, often then has to be prepared for inclusion in a submission. It may not meet the needs of your submission process or the submission tool or the health authority to begin with. So you have to prepare the PDF before including it in a submission, including the submission, and then do a draft publish where it may sort of go through further analysis of further changes as well. So then when you validate, you actually see, okay, what issues do you have? Some of which may be related to how it was converted, some of which may stem all the way back from how the content was authored. It's very late to begin identifying issues that may be content related. Obviously, that issue becomes a little bit more complex than if multiple health authorities are involved. So the whole authoring and review stays the same. It's the same piece of content going all the way through to rendering. But at this point, you create a PDF that may meet the needs of a specific health authority, but not necessarily all of the health authorities that are needed. So in the preparation stage, you may have to prepare multiple PDFs for different health authorities. You may have a common standard that you use, but many organizations also have specific ones for Japan, for the US, for Europe. There may be slight nuances, very slight differences between the two. And all of that takes some time in the preparation stage. Those individual PDFs are then included in the relevant submissions. You draft, publish, and then you validate multiple PDFs, obviously, to ensure that they meet the needs of the different health authorities, where there are some nuances, some slight differences in the specs. So if you look at kind of how that, what the impact of that could be. So if you've got just taking 3 sample source documents through simple Word documents, for example, that are then rendered to a specification of PDF. Then each of those PDFs has to be prepared for each region that those files are going to be submitted. In this example, just 5 regions. We've got the US, we've got Europe, we've got Japan, Switzerland, and Canada, ultimately, for each one. So we've got 5 preparations per document. You then have to check, once you've prepared it, you then check that they're submission ready, do some final checks, resolve any issues that may sort of remain before including those documents or PDFs into your publishing tool. You then run a draft publish at some point before you're able to then validate, which then often will kind of perform some kind of validation on the content as well as part of that validation process. And then you resolve any issues, and you may loop back and go around in circles until ultimately you get your final submission created. And in very simple terms, with just 3 documents, at a high level steps, there's 86 steps, or about 116 if you just include 1 resolution per document. Again, this is high level, and each of these steps may have a number of sub-steps within it. Checking that documents are submission ready may involve multiple tools. Fixing things may involve many steps as well. But just at a high level, this is how many we're looking at. And we can kind of see the impact of automating this could have as we talk through this as well. Obviously, when you're in Reg Ops, there's a lot of things you're obviously having to consider. Obviously, making sure you're not missing any deadlines. Obviously, that gets more difficult when multiple health authorities are involved. You're obviously making sure you're using different tools, the appropriate tools, dealing with last-minute changes to content, etc. as well. All exacerbates the problem. So at that point, I just want to quickly ask, for those of you that are on the line, a couple of quick questions. Firstly, whether or not you are actually creating submissions for multiple global markets. Again, we have clients and people interested on the call who may just be in a local market and you're only creating national applications for one specific market. Are you creating multiple global sort of submissions today? And also, where you're actually creating global submissions, how are you actually creating the PDFs? Are you creating one PDF spec for all regions and you're creating a common PDF that suits the needs of all markets? Or are you creating specific PDFs for different regions? So Japan may have slight differences from Europe or from the US. Do you have some differences there, or do you have create a common sort of version? Or do you just let your publishing tool deal with that towards the end as well and just let that figure out and make sure it complies with each region? I'm just going to leave that up and running for the moment, and I may refer back to that as we go through, but thank you for your feedback there. Obviously, that's interesting. A lot of people use common specs, and in other sessions we've had, it's kind of the reverse, and we have people creating, region-specific PDFs as well. Excellent. Thank you. I'll leave that going. Obviously, when you're looking at, even before the content's converted, obviously, if you're looking to prepare the content to be converted or, into these different regions, PDFs or one PDF, obviously, to begin with, you have to make sure that your Word document is suitable. So you obviously have a lot of checking of content up front, looking for text that's blue, that isn't a hyperlink, tables that don't fit the page width, so fonts become extremely small and illegible and potentially below the recommended guidelines. Fonts not embedded in the right way, so that once you get into the PDF itself, you may have a number of issues that you need to address, whether the tables of contents are included at the appropriate times. And again, there may be differences there as to when a table of content is expected. And obviously, your publishing tool can do this to some extent, but if you're also able to do that upfront when you're creating the content, you can save time through that publishing process too. So do you have TOCs present where there should be TOCs in the content? Bookmarks, are they at the right level? Do you have the right number of bookmark levels? Is it open to the right level to begin with when you open the file up? Or are your hyperlinks the right color? Or do they use the correct zoom setting? Inherit zoom instead of fit to page, as you see here. Do you have web links remaining or links to external sources that shouldn't be in the content to begin with? Do you have PDF properties set correctly? Incorrect PDF versions. What is the PDF file size too large? Depending on the health authority, there's slight differences in the file size limitations that they're expecting. Is it optimized for fast web view? Are fonts embedded correctly as well? Do you have all the fonts embedded in the way that they're expecting so that the reviewer can view the content as it was authored as well? And also, are your initial view settings correct as well? So when that PDF is opened up, it opens up in a way that a reviewer is expecting. Obviously, all of those things can take a bit of time just to identify the problems to begin with. And then obviously to fix them, they're typically very manual processes in terms of using tools like Acrobat or plugins to Acrobat or third-party tools like toolboxes or other tools like that as well. I'm just going to move this out of the way. Sorry, this poll is just popping up for me. So again, that can be quite manual process as well. Sometimes it might be batch or semi-manual as well, but ultimately it's a very manual, laborious task to kind of perform those fixes, whether in the Word document or in the PDF rendition that is created. So again, what we're looking at here is obviously a number of challenges that you may face. Obviously, the whole process is typically quite slow and time-consuming, resource-intensive. That it typically involves a lot of resources, a lot of time, human time as well, just in actually performing those checks and fixes as you go through. Again, it's typically very manual, which introduces an element of risk as well. Anything that's manual, there's always the risk of human error in what's being performed. It can be quite complex because often multiple tools are used to prepare the content for different regions. And obviously, where there's multiple tools, it also means there's a training burden on the organization to obviously make sure people are able to use the tools as effectively as possible. With that, I did just want to ask a couple of other quick questions, just in terms of the tools that you're using right now to prepare your PDFs for inclusion in submission. So are you using the rendering tool from your content repository, whether that's an Enov or a Documentum or a Viva or a SharePoint? Are you using a rendering tool that's linked directly to your DMS, your content repository? Are you using things like Acrobat? Are you using Office files to, Office tools or the save to PDF option, if you like, from Word, etc., or other tool sets as well, to finalize the PDF like Toolbox, etc. as well. So just interested in what you're using right now. Oh, I'm sorry, this one's actually moved on. I'll just go back here. And also, do you use any region-specific tools? So do you have any tools specific for a region? So if you're preparing content for Japan, for example, do you have any region-specific tools to help you prepare content for specific markets as well? So again, I'll leave that poll up and running just for a little bit. And again, we may refer back to that as we go through. And sorry here, that just kind of flipped through a couple of slides. So with that, just wanted to talk about how to automate this. So that was kind of focused a little bit on how you might do it at the moment, but obviously focus a little bit more now on how and what you can actually automate here as well. So we're going to focus here on the rendering platform itself. In our case, obviously DocShifter, where ultimately we can take content from any repository, basically just about any file format, over 200 different file formats, and do different things with them, perform different functions on that content. And we have different sessions focused in more detail on some of these capabilities. We're really going to focus here more on the conversion to specific formats of PDF, and maybe pulling a few elements from these capabilities like tables or contents that may be required to make that Leaf document, if you like, compliant by making sure it has a TOC where it needs it, and so on. So we'll use some of them, but ultimately a lot of these capabilities can be used depending on the use case. Here we're going to focus on health authority compliance, creating multiple health authority compliant PDFs in this case. But again, it can be used to leverage in different ways for different use cases as well. So what we're going to do to automate, we're going to create workflows that are set up in the background, and the user doesn't have to worry about these. These are actually running, set up, and configured in the background, that when the content is stored in the right specific location that you specify, or reaches a certain lifecycle status, or gets sent to a job queue as part of your document life cycles, all of this happens in the background. All I'm showing you here is how those things are configured in the tool, the kind of what's possible there. But a user themselves never see this. This is all running in the background. It's all configured with this drag and drop capability to say, what do you want to happen to content when it reaches a certain lifecycle state, when it gets dropped in a certain place? You configure it, and then it's left to run in the background automatically. So focusing a little bit on the simultaneous global renditions, we're really looking at funneling in any type of content into DocShifter, pulling it in from different sources, and then spitting out one or multiple kind of renditions that meet the needs of one or more health authorities. So it could be one file in and multiple files out as well. So you could end up with, in this case, 6 different renditions from one Word document that comes in, but as many as you need at the end of the day. So looking at how that might look in a workflow, and I will show you live in the product in just a moment, but just a high-level example, we have a SharePoint repository that's being monitored. So we're looking at a folder, for example, here in SharePoint, or folder plus subfolders, and then we're going to check whether or not a rendition is required for different regions. In this case, just 5 regions. I'm going to check. So what it's going to do is leverage the metadata from the repository to help automate the whole process. And it's just going to check for a specific value and say, okay, is a European rendition required? If it is, it will actually go through the process, through the workflow, create a rendition that meets the needs of the European Health Authority. Same thing for Switzerland, for the US, for Health Canada, for Japan, wherever it may be. So as many as you set up as you want that need to configure. It will only create it if it's necessary. So again, leveraging the metadata, you can have this set up that you've got one file coming in, but potentially, multiple files coming out. If you've got a common format, common PDF, you may just create one common PDF and you don't have these branches, but ultimately there's many other things it can do here, even with a common format. So each one of those regions, so, whether that's EMA, whether that's the FDA, each of them have slight differences in the specifications, and they can be configured in these hi-fi configurations. Here we set up all the options, the parameters for how that PDF will be generated for that region. And that might differ slightly. For example, for Japan, they may group the bookmarks in a different way to how they're bookmarked in Europe or the US, for example. So we can configure that differently in that region's kind of configuration. Again, the user doesn't have to worry about this. This is all taken care of in the background. The user just worries about creating the content, storing it in the right location, and this all happens in the background for you. You can do other things as well as converting. It can also make sure that the file is fixed before it even tries to convert it. We've had separate sessions on how to automatically fix and validate Word content before it even gets converted. So I won't go through that in detail, but ultimately that can be a part of this process too. So for one region, you may fix it one way, apply certain fixes, change to the styling, the tables, etc. Another region, you might do it slightly differently, for example, as well. But ultimately, we can apply these fixes to the content before we even begin to convert it. The same thing with the PDFs. Your source document may be a PDF file. You may not have access to the Word document at all. It may be PDF sent from a CRO or from an external authoring party, or just simply you no longer have access to the original source file. So there's a lot of things you can do in terms of the PDF to fix things as well as identify issues that you may need to address as well. So you can include this identification and fixing of PDF content as well in the process. There are other things you can do as well in terms of bookmarking and content detection. So if you have files that are OCR'd or have been provided without any bookmarks at all, it can automatically create bookmarks for you. So even if they're empty and you maybe have some guidance text remaining in the document, even if it's a PDF file without the source, it is possible to automatically bookmark the file. So there's rules that can be built to automatically bookmark, pull text from the OCR document. It may not be 100% perfect, but it's considerably quicker than having to start from scratch as well. If you go through literally select title by title, adding bookmarks, it can take hours and hours of time. So it can add that all of this was created completely automatically for me based on some rules that I'd created. This was a scanned document. It wasn't an electronic document in this case. On top of that, it's also able to strip text out. So in this case, I've just had some simple guidance text in there that was left remaining. Don't have access to the source document, so I can pull it out automatically in the conversion. So again, when we're talking about converting or preparing this content for multiple health authorities, it's not just necessarily doing a straight conversion to PDF. It can apply various fixes along the way automatically as well. So as well as converting, it can fix the Word document. It can apply these bookmarks or remove guidance text, etc. It can add hyperlinks automatically for you where a source document, for example, has been authored and they haven't created links to tables, figures, etc. as well, just as one example. And that can actually be done automatically when it's converted. The necessary text will become linked to those tables, figures correctly. Obviously, ideally, you go back to the source and make sure the source has the links in for you, but that's not always possible. So this is potentially considerably quicker as well. So again, automatically hyperlink. That is a possibility. And again, all of that would be done a completely compliant way. So if you look at that, if you took a look at that high-level process, taking the 3 source documents, going to 5 different health authorities, if you can remove those manual steps and include them in that automated process for when the doc content is rendered, you could ultimately get, when you take the document, you could automatically have 5 renditions created to slightly different specs for each health authority where that content is going to be used. That's then included in the relevant submissions. A draft publish is performed and validated, and then you potentially go back and resolve. There may still be issues, of course, you have to resolve. It's not going to necessarily resolve absolutely everything. That's impossible, but ultimately it is possible to go back. But even at a very high level, you go down from over 80 steps down to 38, for example, if you were to go straight through the process. Or from 116, about 115 steps down to 73 steps if you have one resolution. The steps as well you're removing are the time-consuming ones. Finding the issues in the first place and actually fixing them, that's very time-consuming. The actual rendering is typically something you just kick off and it takes place potentially in the background. But those time-consuming steps we're trying to remove as much as possible. So again, what I'm going to look at in a moment, I'm going to get into actually show you the system here as well. I'm going to talk about how you can leverage different things. You can leverage the metadata from the repository to help you automate things, to know where that content needs to be used. What submissions are required for that content. So you're not unnecessarily creating multiple renditions where they're not needed. You're only doing it where necessary. So we can leverage the metadata from the repository to do that. There are other ways you can automate as well, but we won't go into that in this session. We do have other sessions where we focus a little bit more on other types of automation as well, based on the type of content, the template used by Word, etc. as well. So there's other ways to do that. But what I do want to do is obviously get into the tool. Promise that there'll be a demo in here, so I'll just jump into that right now. What I'm going to focus on here is really how, sort of looking at how when we're converting and creating these multiple files for different regions, multiple PDFs for different regions, that everything's addressed there, whether that's the bookmarks, the hyperlinks, the PDF properties, that it's optimized in the right way, images are compressed in the right way, tables of contents are added appropriately, etc., etc. These are the things I'm going to look at as well as creating those files. Obviously, it needs to ensure that all these things are addressed as it goes. And there may be slight differences region by region on how the bookmarks are created, for example, or the PDF version that's used for a different health authority. So some things can change. So what I'll do is I'm just going to exit out of this for a second and just kind of show you in the tool very briefly. I'm just going to move my picture out of the way. What I have here is a SharePoint repository. I'm going to use SharePoint in the demonstration, but ultimately this would work in a very similar way, whether you're using Enov, whether you're using Documentum, whether you're using Viva, whether you're using SharePoint, the same thing can apply, or even if you're using file shares on your network somewhere. Ultimately, you can do everything that I'm showing you here just about in any repository. The way it works is slightly different, but ultimately, the way things work in DocShifter is consistent. It can connect to any of those repositories. It's not tied to any one. It can connect to multiple if need be. So I basically have in here a SharePoint repository with some global documents. And again, very simple Word documents just here. We can always go into more detail with anybody on specific formats, etc. as well. But I have some simple Word documents in here. And then I have, because SharePoint doesn't have the concept of a rendition, I have just 3 separate folders that I've created for some Japanese output, for some US output, and for some European output. So I just created separate folders. Obviously, if you're working in a repository that has the concept of renditions, all the results that I'm going to show you here could be generated as renditions to the source document that was processed as well. So it is possible to do that. I'm just showing you here in SharePoint right now to kind of highlight how multiple are created in different folders in this case. What I have as well in here is basically a DocShifter system that is, if I just go into my workflows, I'm just going to filter this view slightly. I have a simple workflow to begin with that is going to be monitoring that folder. And it's monitoring that folder for content with a specific status. So the status that I'm looking for at this point is this processed by DocShifter. So if this value is unchecked, it means it's not been processed yet. So it should attempt to create a rendition or multiple renditions, depending on what the workflow is doing. So that trigger can be anything. In this case, in SharePoint, that's what the trigger is. It's one of these attributes. In a Documentum environment, it could be, it's sent to a job queue, you know, based on your life cycles. In Viva, it can be different attributes. They can be the trigger for these things to happen. But at the end of the day, the user doesn't have to worry other than creating content and making sure that you progress it through the life cycle stage as necessary. And the different life cycle stages, all of this will happen automatically in the background for you. So in this case, what it's going to do is it's going to take the content, any content that's stored in there, and it's going to branch out in 3 different ways. Very simply, it's going to create a PMDA compliant rendition. It's also going to create in the middle aisle an FDA compliant rendition. But before it does that, it's going to potentially add a table of content first. It's going to check if a TOC is necessary. If there isn't one already there, it will then add one to the beginning. And then it will also create an EMA compliant rendition. And each one of those renditions will then be stored in the appropriate output folder. Again, if you have a DMS with renditions, the results can go back and be stored as renditions of the document in the relevant repository too. So if I just look at that right now, if I come in here, and I'm just going to show you the documents that I am using, so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm just going to use this simple document to begin with. I have a 266 toxicology written summary. Again, a very simple template type document that still has some guidance text left in it below some of the titles, the headings. I have hyperlinks that in the source document aren't the right color. They may be red in one case. I've got a black one here, etc. as well. I have various tables included. Again, a lot of this is blank. It's just to show you the idea. So this is one of the source documents that I'm using. So if I just come across here, I'm going to send this one now. I'm just going to set that status, which again, could be done automatically as part of your lifecycle. So I'm just going to change the status here to trigger a request for those global renditions. In this case, in this workflow's case, that means 3 different renditions with slightly different specs. So I change that status, and what I should see, if I go to my Japan folder, I've got my Japanese rendition, my US, I've got my US rendition, and in the EU folder, I've got my EU compliant rendition. So they're going to be 3 slightly different spec PDFs. And when I say different specs, what I mean by that is each one of these has a different configuration. This is PMDA compliant, FDA compliant, EMA compliant. And if I look at these settings, you can see that there's a whole heap of settings for how this PDF will be created in this case. So for Japan, the way I bookmark, for example, I may group my tables and figures bookmarks, for example. I may want to group them in a slightly different way from how they're managed in Europe and in the US. So I have grouping, but I can also define in here how many levels of bookmarks I want, how many should be open when I open the PDF file, etc. So there's about 200 different parameters in here that you can configure differently depending on the region that you're submitting to. So I've got bookmark options. I have options in here for font handling, how my font should be embedded for different regions as well. So typically you need to embed all the fonts that are being used apart from standard fonts. You may not need to embed. So you can decide how you want to embed the fonts. So there's various font embedding options. You can define how your hyperlinks should look, whether they should be blue. You can underline them, put them in boxes. Typically they're just blue. But obviously you can also disable or delete external hyperlinks as well to websites, for example, to make sure they're compliant as well. You can make sure your images are all sort of compliant, some PDF specific options in terms of what PDF version do you want the output to be stored at. And again, that can differ region by region a little bit. Typically it's 1.4 to 1.7, but some countries still have specific requirements there as well. And again, we then also have some system settings for making sure that the file is optimized, the results are optimized in the right way, and that your view settings are defined as well. So when you open the file up, it's open in a way that the reviewer is expecting. Again, as a user, you don't have to worry about any of these settings. They never see this. These are configured in the background so that whenever a document needs to be created to a specific specification, those options are defined. No matter who creates it, it will always be created in a compliant way, in a consistent, compliant way. It just gives you the flexibility to handle different scenarios. But if I take these files, for example, if I download this, I'm going to download this to Acrobat just because it's a little easier to show you. If I download this file, I'm just going to open this up in Acrobat. I'll just open this up here. So I've just got my one file. So this is that document that didn't have a TLC to begin with, but in the US route, I told it to add one automatically for me. So obviously the layout of this, I can define and make it look how I want with whichever fonts, styling, etc. I like, but this was generated automatically. It didn't exist in the document, but basically I'd set it up that if the document exceeded 5 pages, didn't have a TLC already, the one should be added for me. So I've generated the TLC, and then within the document, I've made sure that all my hyperlinks are blue, regardless of how they were in the original document. Somebody made it blue or pink or whatever their favorite color was, doesn't matter. It will make sure that everything is blue. Not only that, obviously make sure that they comply. They're all set to inherit zoom. So as the reviewer's navigating from one part of the document to another, the zoom level isn't zooming in and out and making them giddy, basically. So the zoom level just stays consistent. And that's the same for all, bookmarks, hyperlinks, all the same. So again, you got bookmarks created to the level that you specified only. And in this case, it's US. So I've got my tables are scattered throughout the normal bookmark tree. If I was to go to the Japanese output, for example, instead, and download this one, just to show you, and I'll just open this file up instead. The difference here is that I didn't tell it to create a TLC in this case. So just as an example, to show you there's some difference in the output, there's no TLC defined. You still obviously make sure that things like your hyperlinks, are blue, etc. There's a lot of consistency. Most settings are the same. But one difference might be that the way the bookmarks were generated. So instead of having tables scattered throughout the bookmarks, the standard bookmark tree, they're all grouped at the end. So I've grouped bookmarks for my tables, potentially my figures, appendices, diagrams, etc. below. So again, same exact original source document, treated in slightly different ways. So I create PDFs that meet the needs of different health authorities or different specific use cases. Okay. So again, that was quite a simple example. If I look over here, if you want to do a little bit more with this as well, if I go in, I have a different workflow that I can show you that actually enhances, has a lot more fixing or enrichment sort of elements included as well. So I'm just going to disable this one. I'm going to enable a different workflow. Again, you can have multiple enabled. I'm just showing you one at a time here for now. But if I open this workflow up, basically the slight difference here is that you do still have the option of for each of the regions to just create the PDF to meet the specification necessary. But there may be other things that you want to treat as well. So things like that automated hyperlinker or bookmarker, etc., they can be included. But also in this case, what I'm doing is saying, I want to leverage the metadata from my DMS to check whether or not I want to fix the document before I convert it to PDF. So you have this capability to validate and actually fix my Word source document. So I can actually add steps in the flow if it needs fixing. I'm just going to look to see, check the value of a parameter here, this fixed value. If this attribute is set to true, then the document, when it gets converted to PDF, it will also attempt to do a number of other things rather than just create a PDF and then store the results in the output, which it can do. But it could also go through, fix the Word document first, apply some fixes. And those are things like, fixing tables, figures, removing empty paragraphs, headings, etc. And I'll show you a couple of simple examples. So it's going to fix the document first. It's going to add a TOC if it's necessary. Again, it's going to convert to PDF, but it's then going to do some content detection. And it's going to try to remove, for example, in this case, some guidance text from the results. So I strip out any guidance text automatically. Again, I could have added other steps to do automated hyperlinking, more advanced, some automated bookmarking where none existed. There's other steps I could have added. In this case, I'm just showing you one scenario. We could add a lot more there as well if you wanted to. So with that, the slight difference here is if I now take this same document and I kick that off, I'm just going to send that to be processed. And while that one's processing, what I'll do is just show you a different source document that has some other, just to show you a little bit more of how we can fix the document as it's being converted to PDF. This one just highlights that a little bit more. It's a very simple, very clearly non-regulatory document, but it does have a number of common authoring kind of issues in it as well. So I've got some blank spaces in my headings. I've got heading numbers out of sequence. It goes 1, then 3. I got links to external websites. I've got a watermark behind the page. I have a table that doesn't fit the page width. I have images that are not in line. I have comments remaining, etc., empty paragraphs, etc. as well. So it's just another simple example. So what I'll do as well is I'll send that document to be processed as well, just to show you kind of the effects of actually fixing a document as well. But maybe before that, I'll just quickly show you in here. So this should have just been created. Again, now this is a slightly different document. It's now been fixed as well. And I've actually applied more changes to it. So I won't open it up in Toolbox. The main thing I want to show you here is that as well as, I've got my table of content again, but it's done more to it. For example, it's stripped out my guidance text. So it's automatically stripped out those guidance text below each heading. I've left the spacing as it was in this example. You could obviously adjust that as well. So a lot of these things have been removed automatically for me as well. So I've done a little bit more to the content. I've fixed some elements as well. So it can fix up to 60 different items. As it's looking at the document, there's a lot of things that it can change. And that was the reason I quickly sent this other sample through as well. This sample more issues document, that's finished processing now as well. So if I open this file up, you'll see that that is quite different from the original source in that it's fixed a lot of these issues. I don't have padding spaces anymore. I don't have empty paragraphs. They've been stripped out. My heading numbers are now in sequence. My table's been extended to fit the page width, which can affect kind of font sizes so that they are no longer too small and are more legible. I've got watermarks have been stripped out. My images are now set to be in line, etc. as well. So it's fixed automatically before, as it was converting the file to multiple health authorities requirements. It was also fixing the document as it went as well and stripping text out, and it could have done auto bookmarking, etc. as well. So I just wanted to show you a little bit more of a complex example there as we went through as well. So again, that was very quick. Obviously, there's a lot more it can do. We do talk a lot more about what you can do on individual documents, which then can come through here at a multi-health authority level as well. So again, if you do want more details, let us know. We can always send you recordings from previous webinars or arrange a one-on-one discussion with you as well. But with that, let me just quickly come back to my slide deck very briefly. So just again, I just want to go back to that initial slide about what are the benefits of it. Again, a lot of this is just reducing risk. If you have to do all these things manually, human error is going to creep in at some point as well. So it does reduce risk by automating things more. It's more consistent. The results you get are more consistent. As long as you've set things up correctly, you get consistent, compliant results. Again, it streamlines the entire process. It's far quicker, uses far less resources, and you do achieve that content compliance much earlier than you would if you have to wait until you've actually draft published, run the validation in the submission tool, and then look to see what's wrong. At the end of the day, you could already do that directly as part of your rendering process, actually create a report that tells you whether each document is actually compliant or not and fix it for you. The idea really being, if you look at that authoring process for content, you're really moving the ability to see or achieve content compliance much earlier, rather than really not achieving it in many cases until you publish and get that final output. The idea with DocShifter is that you're able to achieve regulatory or health authority compliance, not just submission ready, it's really health authority ready to share with the health authority, as if it's gone through a publishing tool. It's not a publishing tool, it's just dealing with the individual content, but it really does get you to the point where it's ready to share. That way you can identify those issues and address them much earlier, not at the point when you're trying to rush to get the submission out the door. You're able to address those things much, much earlier. That's the intention. With that, just a quick couple of poll questions. I know I'm kind of coming up on time here, sort of a minute or two left. So just want to ask, obviously, one, if anybody's interested in a deeper dive, obviously you can always reach out to us. You hopefully have our contact details. I'll pull up in just a second as well. In fact, I'll just pull that up while this is there. So do take down contact details if you want to reach out and ask any specific questions. By all means, use the comments at the bottom of the chat if you've got any questions still right now. Obviously, we can go on a deep dive session together one-on-one. We'll arrange more webinars where we go into some of what's possible in depth a little bit more. This was just to show you how everything we show you at an individual document level is possible as well, across multiple regions, for when you're creating simultaneous results as well. So one, if you want to reach out, and also just if you don't mind rating the session, it's always good for us to get feedback there as well.